Though many versions of the Banshee myth can be found all over the Celtic world, it is the Irish Banshee that is the most well known. In Irish Gaelic, Banshee translates to women of the fairy hills, and though she is associated with death, she is not a spirit, but rather one of the fae. Banshees can take on many different appearances, though most of the time she will appear as a beautiful young woman or an old hag. She will mourn for those about to die with either a beautiful song or an eerie wail. The role of the Banshee is to warn of impending death. Usually an individual Banshee will act as a harbinger only for those of a certain family. These families are said to be of true Irish origin and will have either an O or Mac in the name. Tales of Banshee visitation have been reported as late as the 18th century, and it is said that when a group of Banshee are seen mourning together, someone of great character is about to die. There have been many reports of Banshee sightings, each varying slightly. In different instances, she may interact more with humans, or she may seem completely unaware of spectators. In some cases, she is kind and empathetic in her warning, and in others, she seems almost malevolent and happy about a death. The Banshee is also loosely tied to the Costio Bor, or the death coach, that is said to carry the souls of the dead to the afterlife. It is driven by the Dullahan, a headless horseman, and sightings of this ghoulish coach are also omens of death.
The Ben Nye is a kind of banshee from Scotland. Ben Nye is Scottish Gaelic for washerwoman. She is often an old woman, but may appear as young and beautiful. She is usually seen wearing green, and may sometimes have red, webbed feet. She is found near isolated rivers or streams, where she washes the bloody clothes of a person who is about to die, and her wailing forewarns their death. The washer at the ford is the English form of the banshee. She is either an old or a young and beautiful woman. She washes the clothes of those about to die in the ford of a river. Like the other kinds of banshee, her wails foretell death. The Cadenog is another version of the banshee from Glencoe. She is said to be found crying near a waterfall before a disaster befalls a certain clan. She appears in some stories about the massacre at Glencoe in 1692. The Ceanteg is a similar version of the banshee from the Isle of Islay and Kintry. The Tunaras Nos is another figure from Breton.
The Welsh Banshee is known as the Gwrach Yribin and the Cuchuraith. Some believe these are two separate creatures, but there is so little difference between them that they are usually combined together, or their names are used interchangeably. The main differences between the two is that the Cuchuraith is never seen. She is usually described as a groaning spirit, whose moans sound like that of a deathly ill person. She moans 3 times, growing weaker and fainter with each moan. The Gwrach Yribin is usually described as a hideously ugly woman and sometimes as a goblin woman. It has been said that the Cuchuraith's cries are as terrible to the ears as the Gwrach Yribin is terrible to the eyes. The characteristics of the Welsh Banshee are as follows. She is usually described as a hideously ugly woman with long black teeth and long claws, with messy, disheveled hair that is gray or red. She is also described as having lanky arms and a cadaverous appearance. The main characteristic that sets her apart from the Irish and Scottish banshees is her wings, which are large and bat-like. Similar to the Irish and Scottish myth, she howls ominously before a death. She appears in the mist in the mountains, which is why she is also known as the Hag of the Mist. She also appears at crossroads or at a water's edge. She approaches the window of a chronically sick person. She flaps her wings against the window and cries her blood-freezing howl while eerily calling out the person's name who is about to die. Her cries are also heard in the mountains. If your husband was about to die, the Kuhuraith would cry, like that of a mourning wife, my husband, my husband. But if your wife was about to die, the Kuhuraith would assume a male's voice and say, my wife, as if he was mourning the loss of his wife. This would signify the death of that loved one to the hearer. If the hearer could not make out the words, it meant that they were the person being foremourned. Dungeons & Dragons puts a new twist on the Banshee myth. In this game, she is a hideous woman that enjoys bringing death to living creatures. She has a misty form, and when in close proximity to trees and bushes, she causes them to wilt. She is not a typical Banshee because instead of her scream being an omen of death, her scream actually causes death. Luckily, she is only able to wail a maximum of 3 times a day.
Every culture has its superstitions or customs surrounding death, and so it comes as no surprise that there are similar legends outside the Celtic world that bear a resemblance to the Banshee. 2 such examples of these legends are the Kumakatok from the Philippines and La Llorona from Central America. The Filipino Kumakatok is a myth concerning 3 hooded figures in dark robes that knock on the door of a family where a death is imminent. The 3 figures generally consist of a young woman and 2 older men. They do not seem to care if someone opens the door or not, as the death is unavoidable either way. To warn off the Kumakatok, people would paint white crosses on their doors. This caused the Kumakatok to begin knocking on the doors of hospitals and other public buildings instead of family homes. There is very little in the way of written documentation, and so it seems that either the myth was not very important in Filipino beliefs or that it was passed down as an oral tradition. The popularity of the Kumakatok waned after World War II, though in 1945 in Manila, the Kumakatok were supposedly seen knocking on doors all over the city just before it was bombed. Another myth similar to that of the Banshee is the Central American tale of La Llorona, meaning weeping woman in Spanish. An important distinction between her and the Banshee is that La Llorona is actually a spirit and was a mortal being at one point. When she was alive, she was reportedly a very beautiful yet poor young woman named Maria, who fell in love with a wealthy man. They were married, and she bore him 2 or 3 children, but after a few years he grew tired of her and sought out a woman of his own social standing. He would come by and visit Maria and the children, but only paid attention to his kids. In a jealous rage, Maria threw their children into a nearby river and then drowned herself. Due to her guilt, or perhaps intervention from a higher power, Maria was forced to walk rivers and streams in search of the souls of her dead children. She can be compared to the Welsh Cuchuraith as she weeps and cries out, Mis hijos, as she walks. In some versions of the tale, hearing her call serves as a warning for wandering children. The tale of La Llorona may have its roots in Aztec beliefs as the fertility goddess Cihuacoatl, whose spirit followers stole children at crossroads in the night. Banshees in pop culture seem to have taken on more of a spirit-like form rather than fairy, perhaps due to their association with death and their ability to appear out of thin air. This shift could be due to the disparities between today's ideas of fairies and the idea of fairies at the time of the Banshee myth's creation. Fairies today are associated with the likes of Tinkerbell and the godmother from Cinderella, whereas in medieval times, fairies were stronger and consisted of creatures of all forms that existed outside of human standards. A 1987 episode of the cartoon The Real Ghostbusters, Banshee Bake a Cherry Pie, featured a banshee disguised as a beautiful up-and-coming Irish singer named Shanna O'Callaghan. The banshee's singing was capable of causing destruction and seducing men, similar to that of a siren. The banshee planned to cause destruction across the United States with her coast-to-coast tour. She had a weakness to mirrors, as they showed her true self, and a weakness to feedback from her own singing. This representation has the Banshee accurately behaving more like a fairy, though traditionally a Banshee's wail would not physically harm anyone. In the novel Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the Defense Against the Dark Arts class fights a boggart that takes the form of a Banshee in an attempt to scare Harry's Irish classmate Seamus Finnegan. He is able to cause the fake Banshee to lose her voice, robbing her of her power. In the previous book, Chamber of Secrets, the Defense Against the Arts professor for that year wrote a book called Break with a Banshee, in which he fraudulently claimed to have banished the Bandon Banshee. In the 1959 movie, Darby O'Gill and the Little People, a banshee is seen floating near Katie, the daughter of the main character, who has fallen on a fairy hill. The banshee disappears when Darby throws a lantern at it. The banshee reappears outside Darby's house where an unconscious Katie has been taken. The banshee summons the Kostya Bar, meant for Katie, but through the intervention of a leprechaun, the coach takes Darby's soul instead. The banshee appears as a cloaked old hag with long skeletal fingers. She bears minimal resemblance to a human woman, as she is floating, translucent, and surrounded by a blue-green light. This could be due to the modern idea of a banshee being more ghost-like than fae. In the game Dungeons & Dragons, there is a character called the Banshee. She is very ugly, causes plants to wither in her presence, and can physically harm people near her when she wails, which she can only do 3 times a day. She hates all living things and takes great joy in attacking them. She takes on an incorporeal form and is considered undead. Besides the name, the shrieking, and the association with death, this modern representation of the Banshee is more of a cross between a monster and a ghost, and is fairly inaccurate.